Let's start this thing. I mean, I've already said in the introduction how thrilled I am that you're here. Just such an outstanding dude who has taught me so much in my life, in our interactions. And I think we've only met in person 3 times, perhaps. Been in groups together and a number of different things, but only in person 3 or 4 times. But the times we've been together, both virtually and live, you've taught me so much. So let's just start by telling us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What do you do? What hobbies make up the life of Craig Watson?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and the feeling is mutual. I have learned just so much from you, and not just information, but just valuable life stuff and Jesus stuff. So thank you for that, Brian.
My pleasure.
My name is Craig Watson. I'm born and raised in Texas. I lived here all my life. Went to A&M. Um,
Ooh, go
actually went to school.
Aggies.
Yeah, that's right. Gig 'em, right? And
Giggum.
actually went to school to be an engineer, but ended up spending a career in law enforcement. And now I own a small construction business, and we remodel houses. Along the way, actually went to nursing school, and and then spent some time working for my church. My wife and I were both previously married and divorced, and we actually went to high school together and re-met at our 20th high school reunion. And
Wow.
her name's Laura, and she has been just a huge blessing to me. We're a blended family. We have 5 kids, and the youngest is 17, and the oldest is 25 as we're recording. And that oldest one, my daughter, she has blessed us this year with the our new roles as grandparents. So we have our first
Woohoo!
grandchild, and we have just been just so excited about that. It's been an incredible experience.
We, as of this recording, just had number 2 grandkids. So I
What
have
a deal!
now felt what it feels like to um, both have a grandchild for the first time and all the things that changes. And then that I anticipated what's it like to try to spread that second generation love to a second kid. And I held little Denver and teared up, man. I cried. My mouth, my words just shook. He's such a beautiful boy. And then I'm crying and trying not to get tears on him. It's powerful, isn't it?
Oh yeah, incredible,
I love it. Well, it
amazing.
sounds a little bit like with your career, you're still trying to figure out like what are you going to do when you grow up and you're a grandpa? Is that part of living
Yeah,
fully alive?
that's that's right. Well, it has definitely been. I first tried it my own way, and then along the way, I found Jesus, or He found me, and we're trying it His way, and it seems to be going a lot better.
Tell us just a little bit. I know that this wasn't a part of the outline I've sent, but just how did that come to be? How you said Jesus made himself known to you. What happened there, if you can share?
Well, I mean, I grew up going to church, at least for the most part. Starting in junior high, my mom took me to church, and part of my story is I was just, and in fact, it ties in with what we're going to be talking about as far as the cisterns and where we find value and whether or not we're lovable. But I was a product of divorce, and my father was not present. He was around, but just not immediately available for sure. And so I struggled a lot in growing up, and even I mean, well, actually to this day, although Jesus is healing that with am I lovable, am I
Mm,
valuable, and part of the ways that I found at least an answer to that. My own answer was I tried to do things well. And so by doing things well,
yeah, me
I
too.
found that people appreciated that, and so I was going for their acceptance, and ultimately that even went into church. And so I went to church as a junior high student, as a high school student, and I did church well.
Mm,
In fact, my junior and senior year in the youth group at the church that I went to, I was in leadership there, vice president my junior year, president my senior year, gave the message at senior Sunday,
whoa.
and but all that time I was not doing that out of a genuine relationship with Jesus. It was um, just what I did. I did
Mm,
things well, so I did church well, and it wasn't about Jesus. It was about me. It was about the way that people saw me, the way they, whether or not they would accept me. And so that continued on into early adulthood. And I would have always said anywhere along the way that I believed in Jesus, that I believed in God. But it actually wasn't until I was going through my divorce at the age of 39 that I found I just ended. It was at the end of my hope.
Mm,
It was when everything that I had built under my own power and determination, everything that I felt like I had, that it all came crumbling down, and I didn't have anything that I invested my whole life into other than my kids. They were still there, of course, but everything else was gone. And just when I can remember being on the floor of my living room one day and just weeping.
mm,
And it was in that moment, in that place, um, that Jesus came to me, and he
mm,
offered me his hope, and I accepted him, as my Lord and Savior. And
mm,
and I know that was genuine, and I know
mm.
what I had before wasn't, because every day since then has been different. It Not every day has necessarily been better, but it has been a
I hear you,
progressive.
brother. I
It
hear
has
you.
been a progress. It has been a progressive surrender to His lordship, and the process. He has changed me. He has changed my life. He has
Mm.
changed my relationships, and virtually every aspect and relationship that I have, He has changed, affected, and made better.
I sure am glad I asked that question because that is so meaningful to me, and I imagine will be very meaningful to people listening to this podcast. I expected you to say a lot of things that were very different than your in your whatever some people call the BC days before Christ days. They're usually little earthier and saltier stories. Yours were I was more like Paul. I was excelling. I was exceeding, but I was there's a way to do the right things for the wrong reason and be
Mm.
empty and not fully alive. And we talk a lot about closing that fully alive gap. And wow, you just probably helped an awful lot of people see a part of their own story. So thank you for that. Well, I mentioned let's start to move toward the content here. Um, I mentioned in the introduction that you're a coach in the Fully
Mm.
Alive community. And what that means is you're somebody that we know, somebody that we trust, we've journeyed with, we've spent time with and asked certain questions and all these things, vetted, a person to represent the Fully Alive community as we try to encourage individuals and churches around the world to lead people to become fully alive and do it out of an abundance mindset, not to build the fully alive community or any way, but to just simply equip people with the ability to be dependent upon Jesus and his spirit the way you became that day, and to optimize character and calling, to live fully alive. Because if we optimize character and calling, we grow in intimacy and influence out of the the well of the spring of living water and not the cisterns that we're going to unpack here in a minute. So you're just one of those people, and you're one of those people because you've internalized what I call the character times calling equals impact way, the fully alive way, the character times calling equals impact way. So just take a minute and share why this approach to disciple making makes the most sense to you and how you use it to personally grow.
Sure. I can remember the first time that you shared that with me, and just how much sense it made, how intuitive it seemed, and how it plugged in not only to where I was then, but how I'd seen my journey up to that point. And just like I said, I accepted Christ late in life, and it was on that summer day, in on the floor of my living room where I accepted him as my Lord and Savior. But my character didn't automatically change in that moment.
Right?
My
Mine either.
devotion to him did, my acceptance of it, my surrender to him, certainly all those things changed. But I didn't suddenly become just this different person with. And we read in Galatians 5 what the character of Christ is, love,
Right?
peace, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And none of those things increased the moment after I
Right.
accepted
It's not
Christ.
not a switch flip, a flip
Right.
switch. Yep.
Exactly.
I'm the same
Exactly.
old guy I was, but with hope. Yeah.
Right. And so my character, had not increased, and I didn't have a clue I didn't even know that calling existed, much less what mine was,
Mm,
and
mm.
I can remember serving significantly for the first time in the church, my home church, that it was on VBS week, Vacation Bible School, and I stood on a curb and made sure that kids crossed safely all week long, and that's all I did. I smiled at kids and stopped cars and waved at people, and that
Nice.
was that was the most significant service that I had up until that point, and it's all I didn't know what God had uniquely created me to do, but I was there to do something, so I thought I'd try that, and
That's a
it
great
was
place to
rewarding.
start. Oh
It
yeah.
was rewarding. It certainly was. I got a lot of smiles and I got a sunburn, and but God used it, and he
Oh
used
yeah.
that to not only grow my character, but to help me understand a little bit better my calling. And but the point is, and we plug that into the equation. My character then, as far as compared to Christ's character, was maybe a one, right?
Yeah.
And having no understanding of my calling, well, my calling was at a one. Well, one times one is one. Am I having an impact on the kingdom? Yeah, yeah. I mean, certainly before before I came to Christ, I was zero impact, right? But now I was
Mm.
having some impact, and I made a difference on that week. But what it enabled me to do was put to language some of those things that I had learned up till then, and help me grow personally, but also help other people grow. For example, my the I went on a mission trip. In fact, a series of years, 4 years in a row, we went to New Mexico. We served the Navajo Nation there, and it was really just a wonderful experience, wonderful people, and
Mm.
but what that experience gave me was almost a measuring stick. I was in this period, my wife and I, of rapid growth in our faith, and increasingly depending on Jesus and submitting to Him, and so, but you can't necessarily measure that day by day. It's kind of like growing up as a kid. As a kid doesn't recognize their own growth. It's so incremental,
Well
right?
said.
But,
Yeah.
but, uh, and that's the way it was for us. We weren't recognizing our own incremental growth. But each time we'd go back to New Mexico and go back to this same place, interacting with these same people and doing some of the same things that we had done the year before, I realized that I had changed over that year. So it
Mm.
was kind of like having this, it was the equivalent of having the mark on the door jamb,
On the
right?
door jam as you're growing
Spiritually,
up.
right?
That's
you know,
awesome.
and
Great
but
metaphor, man.
that was really great for me. It was great to recognize the growth. It was great to see Jesus working in my life and changing me. And it was something that I was able to communicate with other people. I was leading a small group at the time, and it was something I was able to share with them, but it's not very transferable, right? I mean, if I'm going to continue to measure that same growth in me, well, then I have to go back to New Mexico every year, right? And if I want other people to experience that, well, then they need to go to New Mexico, and so it's
Right.
just not very easy to share with other people, and that's one of the reasons why the character times calling equals impact equation is so valuable to me. Not only, like I said, as a personal tool, but as a tool as I help other
Mm.
people grow, that we can measure. Not we can measure ourselves, we can help other people measure their character, their Christ-like character, and how it changes over time, and we can help them understand their calling. We can understand our calling better as we move through gift passion story, GPS, and discover our spiritual gifts, discover
Hmm.
our passions, and how those things interact, and intersect to give us some insight into what God uniquely created us to do.
Mm. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Craig is vetted in our community to be of service. And it's just so fun, Craig, to get feedback from people that you coach, both just regular folks in the marketplace, military, and church leaders alike. So just grateful for you, grateful for your story, your humility, etc. All right, let's start talking about some of this enemy stuff. The title of this podcast is essentially identifying and overcoming the enemy's attempts to keep us from living the fully alive life. That's the longest, most unsnippy title. So I better tighten that down for the actual title of the podcast. But that's the idea. Like, our enemy, according to Jesus, is still doing everything that he can to be a thief who is trying to steal, kill, and destroy all of our capacity for living fully alive. And in the little book that we provide called Fully Alive, a little free ebook in the Fully Alive community, it takes about 45 minutes to read. We unpack the enemy's strategy to pull us away from developing character and calling with the cisterns of approval and control. So, to make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about with these cisterns, will you share what they refer to and why approval and control are the words that we use to describe them? And feel free to use the other words that are in there as well as part of your response.
Yeah, well, right off the bat, starting in Genesis, God tells us that He created us in His own image, and He
Mm-hmm.
created us not only for intimacy with Him, but with each other. And He created us to have influence on the world around us. He said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. And Jesus, echoes that again in Matthew 28 when He gives us the Great Commission. And it says, all authority on earth and in heaven has been given to me, and therefore go and make disciples of all nations, teach them, baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey all that I've commanded, and I'll be with you till the end of time. And
Yeah.
and and so He's saying, as disciples of mine, go and make more disciples, who then go and make more disciples. And so Jesus is saying, go and have an influence on people, have an influence on the world. And the best way to
Absolutely.
do that, to have influence on people, is through intimacy, through love. And so we
Greatest commandment and greatest commission. Greatest commandments: love God and each other. Greatest commandments: go and do and serve everybody else. That's exactly right.
exactly.
It's right there.
And God created us for intimacy and influence. And we often feel as if we are devoid of something, as if something's missing. And he didn't do that by mistake. He intentionally made us deficient. He made us with a longing for intimacy and a longing for influence. And He did that not to be cruel. He did that out of His divine genius. He did that so that ultimately those needs, those deep seated needs, would lead us to Him as the only one that can fully fill those needs and satisfy them. And but the enemy uses those needs. He uses
Mm-hmm.
those needs to steal us away, to steal our joy, to steal our fully alive life. And those needs of intimacy and influence that God intended to fill with Himself, the enemy turns around, and those needs bring about questions. Those questions are, am I lovable and am I valuable? And I alluded to those earlier when I was talking about my childhood and how I associated my lovability, my value, to what I was able to provide for other people, how well I
Mm-hmm.
did at things. And so ultimately, those needs of intimacy and influence bring about those questions: am I lovable and am I valuable? And we have two answers to those questions. One of those is Jesus and obedience to Him. And the other one is self, or competence. And we depend on ourselves and our own ability to fill those needs. And ultimately, what we read in the reference is from Jeremiah 2:13, where He says, for my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewn out His cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water. And so that's an image of what God offers, and then what we so often settle for. And
Mm-hmm.
and I know that I have done a lot of settling. I've dug my own cisterns, and I've returned and lapped at the muddy mess at the bottom, hoping to be filled, and still, always left empty, always left wanting. And I think one of the things one of the reasons why we do that, not only is it a plan of the enemy, but we feel like we have control then.
Mm-hmm.
God offers us unconditional intimacy, unconditional love. And He proved His value when He hung on the cross for us, right? I mean, or our value when He hung on the cross for us. So we have this enormous value to Him, who is the one that defines all truth. And and we have this opportunity for an intimacy with him that has no parallel, and we
Mm,
trade those things for our own cisterns because we think we have control over them, right?
mm.
So we can dial it up or dial it down. If I need to feel more loved, well, I do more stuff, or I
Mm.
go back to this cistern. And ultimately, unconditional love is a little bit hard, I think, for us to accept. It is. It
Yeah,
doesn't
man.
depend on us, right? When things depend on us, well, then we have control over them, and that makes us feel safe, even though it perhaps is just a lie. Well, and certainly is. It's a lie that the enemy
It's for
tells
sure.
us. Right? You can be loved, and you can have control over it. Continue to go and lap at this muddy mess at the bottom of your cistern.
Yep. We can prove that it's not real love and genuine as soon as you don't get out of it what you expected to get out of it, and you get mad and you reject it. You know that it wasn't everything that it was cracked up to be, that it was control. Yeah, great point, man. You're digging like all the way down, like you said, to the bottom of the cisterns. And that's what it does when we do these things to gain from others, not just to give, and we don't get what we want out of it. That's when things break, relationships break, marriages break, etc. It's a very empty spot to be. So
Yeah, they're
thanks
not
for
only a
going there.
poor substitute for the living water. I mean, they're toxic, right? They don't
Mhm.
just inadequately provide for our needs; they kill us.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like getting too much sugar in your bloodstream. It creates a hunger for more sugar, which only creates
Right.
a hunger for more sugar, which only takes all the things down. You're exactly right, and it's destructive. All right, we got the stage set. I mean, you've pointed it out well. God created us whole with Him, right? Uh, Abiding in intimacy and influence with Him. We broke that. Adam and Eve broke that connection with their disobedience. They chose their own competence over their dependence and obedience to God, and they were left. But they had this hunger, this yearning for intimacy and influence didn't go away, and we try to lap at the pools of approval and control. Well, now that the stage is set for some real live examples, what you started to allude to this as a kid, and kind of how you started to solve that or search for that approval. What 2 or 3 times do you recall when the enemy came right at your development of character and calling to derail you, and how did your intimacy or abiding with Jesus and others on the path toward Him help you overcome those affronts?
Well, one of the things that's, I mean, there have been a lot of examples of how the enemy has come at me since I accepted Christ,
Mm,
and but a couple of those stand out. One of them was when my wife and I got married. We, like I said, we're a blended family, and we thought that we were the answers to each other's problems, but
mm,
we were just two lost folks that were bringing a bunch of baggage into a new relationship, and that relationship just didn't satisfy. Right? It did not heal all the brokenness inside of us, but we sure tried. And when we found that we weren't the answer to each other's problems, we were disappointed, and it almost ended in divorce.
mm,
What it ended
mm,
up in instead, though, was a relationship that Jesus redeemed and has just made into this incredible relationship that is as close to Jesus's love as I've ever experienced from a human being. And so I'm
mm,
so thankful for not only the journey that we've been on, but for my wife. But along that journey, one of the things as we were growing, and like I said earlier, we were rapidly developing in our faith, and we lived in a large house. Like I said, we have 5 kids living at home, and our plans anyway. My wife was an occupational therapist at the time. I was going to go to nursing school. We were going to start a home health agency and make lots of money.
all
And
right.
in the middle of that, right, that was our plan. But in the middle of that, God called her to stay at home with the kids, and He called me into construction. So her income was gone. I had been going to nursing school. We had been depending on her income, and I didn't have any clients going into this construction business. And so we moved out of the large house we were in, sold a bunch of our stuff, gave away what we couldn't sell, and we bought a 1978 Clayton mobile home, single wide, and we moved it into a trailer
Giddy
home
up.
community, mobile home community
Nice.
in our town. And we drastically reduced our lifestyle. We whittled down our monthly need monetarily to, I mean, just bare bones, and obviously just reduce the stuff in our life. Uh, but in the process of that, and it certainly was an answer to Jesus's call. It was a exercise in obedience, but it was also a time in which we lost a lot of friends. I mean, believing friends. We were so excited to have this growing faith family, and we lost a good number of those friends just in these choices. What
Mm.
ultimately for us were not choices; they were obedience to Jesus, and they just couldn't understand what we were doing and why we were doing it, and so there were so many instances within that experience, and it lasted a couple of years, where we were in that trailer and basically living job to job. I mean, and there were so many times that if Jesus didn't come through on that particular day, the lights were going to go out, right? Or the
Mm.
kids weren't going to be fed. We were in daily dependence on Him, practically. I mean, for our provision.
Wow.
And it was coming from where I was, because I think one of the biggest enemies to a man, two of them. One is growing up with a father that you can't necessarily point to and depend on as this archetype for God later on when you come to faith.
Sure.
And the
Sure.
other thing is when you're fairly capable of negotiating this world on your own, that, and I had
Mm.
been used to being fairly capable. I'd been used to being able to get by, and I was, for the first time in my life, not able. And it was only through Him.
That's
and
humiliating. It hurts. Mm.
but that was one of the periods of greatest growth. And
Mm.
but there were constant, almost daily attacks from the enemy during that time, where I had to make the choice of whether or not I was going to choose approval of the people that
Mm.
were around me, or
Mm.
intimacy with Jesus, or control over my circumstances, or letting Jesus be the main influence on my life and doing what He said. And both of those things required surrender, and progressive surrender, not just not just in whole, but even categorically. He led me through a process of surrendering my marriage to Him, surrendering my fatherhood to Him, my kids, even almost individually, surrendering my my provision, my career, all of those things, of surrendering to Him. And the world was not for us, but He certainly was.
Mm.
And it was the amount of growth and intimacy that I experienced through that um, ordeal
Mm.
was richer than anything else I had ever had.
Mm.
And so thankful for what He led us through, so thankful of what He gave us in the process of that. He gave us Himself. He gave us a deeper faith. He gave us an
Oh.
understanding that in a very, very real way, what we needed most in life was Him, and everything
Mm.
else was secondary.
Mm.
So another another example, perhaps.
Hold
Well,
on.
not just
Hold on.
go.
Save that one for
So,
a second, because
okay.
you have, Craig, you've afforded me as a listener and everybody else listening an opportunity to see into a real beauty. And part of the beauty is how apparently ugly the story is on the surface. It's like this mangled painting that has beauty emanating from it. I can't think of another way to say it out loud. And so, one, thank you for that. And two, let's just give people space to interpret personally what you just said. I mean, we're talking about fully alive here. And then you described a, a season of a few years. Like 3 months is a long time to struggle. Several years. Um, that's kind of the opposite of what most people would describe as fully alive. In fact, it's quite probable that there are some who hear the title of our app, Fully Alive, and all this, and probably hear it as a slogan of, Jesus loves you, and he has a life on the beach with mahi mahi, not with fishing and mai tais, in store for you for the rest of your life. And that is so not it.
Mm.
But this is. Um, I know you're holding on to those other stories. We'll get to them, but it just seems important for me to because I'm in a season where that's kind of the case right now. I left, my career as a pastor in a local congregation, kind of at the height of that to do this. And there's huge wins with that because of what I get to do. And there's huge challenges with that. They come with this choice too. And sometimes when the waiting, that song, It's in the Waiting, I actually hate that song. Not because it's not a good song, but because sometimes the waiting gets so long that it's just a desert. And some of the
Well,
best. Go ahead. I'm sorry. It's not me. It's not my podcast. It's you. Keep talking.
no, no, it's okay. I mean, well, it wasn't like that period of time was just filled with success after success. I mean, there were real, not just struggles in general as we struggled against the world, but I didn't just progressively have this upward and to the right graph of how I was abiding in Jesus. I mean, there were times
Mhm.
that I failed to abide. For example, I had never had a problem with drinking, but during that time and the way that Jesus used that time to grow my faith and to grow my patience, it was hard to sit in those moments. It was hard to sit waiting for knowing that there was some deadline for a bill in a couple of days and not having a job on the horizon, and just sitting and waiting in that and waiting for Jesus to come through. So sometimes I went to the cistern, right? I went to
Mhm.
the cistern and it, not necessarily as an alternative, but as a way to not be in the moment, to not think about
Yeah.
it, to not have to suffer. And it was his persistence and patience and love that led me through that, and then helped me discover just how false those things are, just
Mm. Mm.
how not only unsatisfying they are, but truly toxic
Yeah.
compared to the
Destructive.
living water that he offers.
Yeah. That's so good. Yeah. Thank you for that transparency. That's kind of what we're talking about. There, there are times that we are invited to share in Jesus' sufferings like that. And it's in those positions that we're probably the most vulnerable
Mm,
to the enemy's temptations. I mean, Jesus had that happen himself. Like he's out in the desert for 40 days without bread, without food, without drink, etc. And that's when Satan comes to him. When the second time Satan comes to him or the enemy comes to him is when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, like fully stressed out about what's about to happen that night and the next day. He's going to be beaten and tortured and ultimately killed. And he's talking to God, saying, "Is there any way we can do this another way?" And
mm.
it's there that the enemy tries to tempt him away from that as well. So powerful. All right, well, I'll stop. I just want people to see how beautiful it is to join Jesus in obedience, even if it doesn't fit the profile of American success. So, a couple of other stories you got ready.
Well, in my journey of faith, as Jesus continued to grow me, there was a time, and I think it's common for a lot of folks, as they really take Jesus seriously and they go all in. That at some point they start to decide what's next, or they start to think about it at least and try to figure out what's next. And I went through the part where I thought, well, maybe he's leading me to seminary. If I'm truly going to serve him well, if I'm going to
Yeah,
have the greatest impact, on the world around me, well, then I need to be properly equipped. And that meant to me at the time that I must work for a church, or be a part of a church, or go to seminary and somehow lead a congregation. And so there was a time after when that, we had been in the mobile home community. In fact, had the opportunity to give away that trailer and move on in life. We donated that to a family that was in need, and
Wow.
and then I had an opportunity to go and work for my local church, the church that I attend, and it was an entry level kind of position. They were going through a remodeling at the time, and I had construction experience, engineering experience, and so I joined them in part to help them negotiate this remodel. And that position grew into being the director of operations for our church. So we're kind of the largest footprint in our area as far as churches go, and so there's a lot of interaction with the community, with the city, and so I was the one that was responsible for those interactions with the city, the coordination for parades and events, and
Wow.
so different associations within the city, our outward face, our outward negotiations, our outward communications with those different entities were my responsibility, as well as planning any large events that we might have. And it's no, I had no doubt in my mind that God led me to that position, that He grew me to a point where I was of benefit to Him in that position, and that position continued to grow me and benefit not just Him and His plan, but me as I continued to grow in Him. But that was, I mean, it was rewarding, but it was also very safe. And I don't mean to say that safe is wrong, or that somehow Jesus doesn't call us to safe, but it was almost relaxing. It was. I certainly had been in positions before, in law enforcement, where I felt like I had been um, persecuted, by people who I was trying to help. I mean, I had been, cussed at, shouted at, assaulted, punched, bit, spit on, shot at, all kinds of stuff as a police officer. But I
Ouch.
had, and you hear about persecution in the church. Well, that was not my experience. It was one where, and working for the church, it was a place that was of honor. It was a place where people looked up to me. It was a place where I
Mm,
felt like I was contributing and making a difference. And it was good. I mean, and it felt good. But ultimately, what happened almost concurrently, as Jesus was growing me in that position, He was also helping me understand His unique plans for my life, the calling
mm,
that He had put on my life, the way that He had equipped me, and who He had called me towards. And it was increasingly understood by me that was towards discipleship, and that was not my role at my church. And
right.
and I didn't necessarily want to carve out a spot for me. I just knew that that's what Jesus had called me to, and I was going to do that regardless of what my role anywhere was, or what I was. And I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to do. I didn't have the
Sure.
tools. I didn't have the vernacular. I didn't have the vocabulary, and to do that, I just knew that that's what Jesus wanted me to do, and somehow, some way, that's what I was going to do. And and then what does he bring into my life? You and Disciples Made. And all of a sudden, I mean, and the timing was just incredible. The day that I end my prayer and fasting, where I'm just wrestling with Jesus, what is it that you want me to do with my life? He answers that not only in the moment, but then the next that in fact that very same day I end up meeting you and some other
That's
guys from Kansas
such a
City,
crazy
and
story.
and I hear about Disciples Made and Followers Made, and it just set me on a different path.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what that path led to was separation from my job at the church. And but in that moment, the end that it was very clear to me that that's what Jesus was calling me to do. If I was called to disciple men in particular, and to help the everyday regular just follower of Christ, and understand that they have a unique part to play in Jesus's story here on earth, that they don't have to be a graduate of seminary, they don't have to work for a church, they don't have to have any special stamp, diploma,
Mm,
license. in order to do that, they need Jesus. They need to abide by him. They need to learn how to hear and obey him.
Mm,
And if
mm,
I was going to help people do that, it didn't make a whole lot of sense for me to work for a church to do that, right?
mm.
You know, I'm working for a church, and I'm telling you, you don't have to work for a church. But I'm not necessarily setting a very good example. I'm not doing what I say, under those circumstances. But in the moment when I was trying to really felt that clear message from and it was a progression. It wasn't just like one day this is what Jesus said.
Right, right.
It was a growing understanding over a course of about a year and a half. And and but ultimately that growing um desire, that growing understand of what it was going to take to be obedient to Jesus, intersected with an opportunity. And so I made the decision to leave the employment with the church. But then there was an opportunity to stay. There was an opportunity to stay at the church, and in fact, it was more of a discipleship position. And so I was very tempted in that moment to not do what I felt like Jesus was calling me to do, but instead to remain at the church and in this place of what I would call relative safety and sureness. I had
Mm.
insurance, I had a secure job, I had a week,
All the
paycheck every,
things.
yeah, all the things, right? And then what I can still do, cool discipleship stuff. But it was very clear in that moment that those two things were opposing. And it reminded me of, when Peter rebuked Jesus, when Jesus is talking about, going to Jerusalem and he's going to die. And Peter rebukes him, and Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." Peter wasn't
Mm,
asking for bad things. He
right.
wasn't saying, for Jesus to do these awful things. He just wanted Jesus to remain with him, to be present, to not have to endure these things. And
Rather
and that doesn't
understandable.
sound like a bad thing. That sounds actually
Right.
like a good thing, but it wasn't the plan for Jesus, right? And because it
Yeah.
wasn't the plan that God had for Jesus, it wasn't a good thing. And so in those moments, that's what I felt, that I was choosing between two good things, and one of them made more sense on paper. One of them made more sense to the world, and one of them was being obedient to Jesus, and that those weren't the same things, right?
Wow.
And and
That's
ultimately
good.
what helped me through that, I mean, I was tempted to stay. There were all kinds of things that the enemy was using good stuff to tempt me not to do what Jesus was calling me to do. And
Yeah.
ultimately it was my buddies that helped lead me through, that moment, that decision point. It was, by
All
this
right.
time I
Hold
had a
on just 1 second, Craig. Hold on just 1 second. Push pause right there because I wanna back up and make sure we make a connection before going to how this thing was solved. I've been listening for principles to extract from these stories that we can crystallize and share with people. One principle from your first story was the enemy will come at you to try to give you poison to try to
Mhm.
take you out of the game when you're in the middle of the game, right? So he's putting negative things in front of you to try to distract you. But in the second story, it wasn't the negative things, it was the sheep looking things, like great things.
Right.
Uh, and so he's crafty. Like these cisterns don't have to all be, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or whatever the list of horrible things we need to avoid as Christians is, right? It could be things that are actually assumed to be of greatest spiritual value. So just two principles there. I mean, it's the same cistern that can come in very, very different forms. And I think that's going to be of great value to the folks listening on this because, wow, what tremendous insight. And it's actually the latter where the cisterns look a lot more like the godlier things we should aspire to things. Those are going to be the hardest ones to discern and to reject. But wow, that's a big story. All right. So now I think if I'm understanding where you're going to how in the world did you not succumb to the cistern of the good thing? And it has something to do with buddies and accountability. So thanks for letting me put you on pause for a second. Now unpause.
Right. Well, ultimately, through followers made, I had understood the value, or come to understand the value of triads, and
Hmm.
how important it was to have two or three guys, in my case, ladies, women, but having two or three guys in my life that I could share that last 5% with, that I could be
Hmm.
completely vulnerable with, that I could count on to lead me, not based on their own stuff or their own desires, but truly uh, try to lead me how Jesus would lead me if he was in their stead. And I turned to them not only for the lead up, but certainly in the process of that, making that decision. And because not only great value within the context of a followers made, leaders made mission, to have the triad, but also have a, because of that, I now have a life triad. I have some guys
Yes,
that
me
that
too.
are not just for a season, but they're indefinitely there, and they're indefinitely there for me, and I'm indefinitely there for them,
It's
as
great.
people who will speak God's good news and truth into each other's lives.
Hmm.
And it was them in that moment that Jesus used to lead me through that, and lead me through their support, their encouragement, their use of God's word, and just reminder of his character and nature. For example, one of them, here I was so certain of my path until I had this potential opportunity. And then all of a sudden, one of the, I can remember thinking that it's almost better to not have multiple opportunities. If I just had one way to go, well, then I don't need to make a choice.
Right?
But,
I,
you know, but, but,
so
but, but,
true.
yeah, but having multiple opportunities requires then you to decide on one. And one of the things, like I said, I was so clear in the direction I was going until that other opportunity came up to stay, and then I was trying to figure that out. And one of them reminded me, he said, remember in Matthew 5, to let your yes be yes and your no be no. And
Mm,
in James
wow.
1, don't be double minded. And I thought he was talking about me. He was saying, hey, Craig, you already said yes to this. Don't let your yes be yes and your no
Right?
be no. Don't go back on what you've said. But I was accepting what he was saying, but he said, no, that's not what I mean. What God is telling us there is not just instructions for us, but he's given us his nature. He's saying that his yes will be yes, his no will be no,
Uh,
and that he is not double minded. And so if you were so sure of his direction, and you knew how to be obedient to what he was telling you to do, well, then do that and know him to be true to the nature that he says, in Matthew and in James. And
wow.
that was one of the things that was so helpful, in that process of coming to the final decision on that particular situation.
How did you know that was God's voice and not just his? Like some people will come with that kind of stuff and it not land, but for you it landed. How did you know that that was God's voice and not just his?
Well, I would say that one of the major ways, and there's a couple at least, but also through followers made, I was introduced to a book called Chair Time, and it's
Yeah.
written by
Yep.
Dan Sutherland. Your buddy, and I had the
Fantastic.
opportunity to meet him one time, and just what an incredible man,
Yeah.
even just in the short period of time that I spent with him, learned so much. But his book is just, I mean, you can read it in a matter of an hour, I think. And
Hmm.
but it is about, my prayers prior to chair time were, I mean, they weren't, I wouldn't call them bad prayers. I mean, I'm communicating with my God, my Lord and Savior. And but they were mostly centered on me, or what I needed or wanted, or asking, how he might be able to join me in what I'm doing. And really, chair time helped me understand that, if we,
Mm,
it's a, we are not just in some future state in the throne room of God, but that we are present with him right now.
hmm.
Spiritually speaking, we have access to him. And if we were sitting in front of him right now in this very moment, we probably wouldn't be telling him all about us. We probably wouldn't be, explaining all our plans. We would be in awe, and we would be all ears, wanting to know what he had to say to us. And chair
Yes.
time helped me change, not that I no longer had prayers of supplication or prayers, but that now I had this tool, this listening prayer, that has become one of just the richest, times of my day, when I spend
Mm.
just listening to God and hearing what it is that He has for me. But in the process of that, it took a while. I didn't immediately start hearing from Him through this process of chair time, but eventually I did start to hear Him, and it's more like an injected thought for me, but it's very distinct, and very distinct
Hmm.
from other voices that, my own voice, or the echoes of other voices from, people in my life that I may hear, in my head. And it's kind of like, like I said, I'm a father, and I can remember being, when my kids were little, and being on the playground, and I learned to distinguish their voice from all the other kids on the
Yes, there
playground.
you
you
go.
know
Come on.
Although you've got, a bunch of kids saying, daddy or mommy or whatever, that I knew, my kids' voices. And um and and it's because I listened to him. It's because I paid attention to him. It's because I wanted to hear him, and it's because of the repetition. And in that same kind of way, I've started to understand what it sounds like when Jesus is speaking to me. And so it
Yeah,
was those things in concert. So yes, he's saying this,
perfect.
and it seems like wisdom, and it sounds like wisdom. But when that's also then reinforced by what I hear through
So
prayer,
valuable.
that's probably the major way that I was able to discern, where that was coming from.
So valuable. Craig, this has been amazing. All right, so we've got some stories. You may have another story, but we are cranking on time here. Somebody is about to get to their destination in their car, or in their walk, or their time on the treadmill, their workout, or whatever. Um, I pulled out a couple of principles. Are there other key principles that you can extract from these stories, or other stories that people can have in their pocket to resist similar attacks? Anything come front of
Well,
mind
I
for
mean,
you?
I think that there's probably more, but I can think of three major reasons that we go to our cisterns, right? And one of them is when we feel like this, that our intimacy and influence is being threatened. These are needs that we have, and we need them filled, and we feel that we're not lovable, or we're not being loved, or that we're not important, we're not valuable. Those things are being called into question, if not by us, by somebody else, but they're threatened. And then a lot of times, those are times when we'll go back to our cisterns.
Yeah.
And when we feel like we're losing those, that intimacy, losing influence, and so we then resort to those, and we try to have control, instead of depending just on God to fill those things. Another time is when we feel not just that they're being threatened, but that they don't exist. That we're
Mm,
lacking, and so we can have it, and everything is going good. Feel like it's being threatened, and go to them. I mean, an example of that is that. One of the most valuable lessons that I learned in my walk with Jesus is that He's enough for me. And
mm,
what that enabled me to do is He is the provider of the love that I need in order to carry on. And it's not that I don't have love for my wife, or that my wife doesn't love me, and that that's not important. But if her love were to stop, I'm going to be okay, because I've got Jesus's love. Well, what
mm,
that let me do is, whenever she had a concern, what I used to feel like was, if she's unhappy with me, she's unhappy with my performance. So that's a threat to my ability to be lovable. She may not love me because I am not performing as a husband adequately, right? I am
mhm,
not meeting her needs. So therefore, I'm not valuable. I'm not worthy of her love. And so what would I do? I would dig into those cisterns, right? And so I would defend my actions. I need to defend at all cost my ability to be lovable, right? I need to
mm, mm.
defend my ability to have control. And so, instead of just hearing her, and perhaps even changing some things, I defended myself, because I could not accept that she might be right, because ultimately, that what I'm saying is, I'm admitting I've failed, and because I've failed, I'm not lovable, I'm
Not
not
lovable.
worthy of your
Yep.
love,
Yep.
right? And so we can go to that cistern because it's being threatened. We can go to it because it's absent, right? And in lieu of love, we seek out other things to get, the intimacy. In lieu of influence, we seek out other means to have control. And then also sometimes we'll just do it out of habit. That's that we have developed these habits. We have worn out the path to our cisterns, and they have become right. They have become our
Grooves.
go-to, right? Yeah, exactly.
We can't
Ruts, and
break
we
a
just,
path. Yep.
yep. And so, although everything may be going okay, we're just used to doing what we do, and that's what we do, and it's not good for us.
This is so rich. It's so valuable. So valuable. I hope people are taking notes about this. Last question. I opened my remarks with the kind of the intro with this idea: living fully alive is our birthright. What else have you learned? if there could be anything else, this has been so rich. What else have you learned about this privileged life that Jesus has afforded us that I haven't asked about today? What's left to share?
Well, at least for me, what it seems like is that Jesus has been helping me become a better conduit for his love and impact on the world. That it's not
Mm,
so much what I have to offer, but what he has to offer through me.
mm,
And so as we grow in our character and we become more like Christ, and we don't need things beyond him, well, we don't need to gain from a particular experience. We don't have to make it about us. It can
mm.
be about him, and we can bless other people just because he decides to bless them through us. And it's like we become unclogged, as our character becomes
A
more
good
like him.
plumbing
We're a better
term.
pipe, right? Right. We're a better pipe for him to use, to flow through. And I have just been increasingly not only amazed but just filled with joy as
Mm,
he has um, not only grown me, changed me, and unclogged me, so that I can be a better conduit for him. Because it is such a wonderful thing to be used by him, to be
mm,
called according to his purposes, to to
mm.
to to let him use you to love other people. And that's I don't know that I have a better description for what fully alive feels like to me.
That's amazing. I'm actually thinking back right now to a picture that I drew when I led Followers Made for the first time. Um, I designed Followers Made, but I didn't do it for a couple of years after designing it. But my first time through it, I've got new guys in there and seasoned guys in there, and I draw a picture of a toilet and plumbing underneath it. I was like, if you want to unclog the spirit's movement in your life, focus on these two outcomes. So it's so funny that you mentioned plumbing. I'm gonna have to find that picture, and whenever we post this, make sure that picture gets there. Oh gosh, my
Yeah,
friends,
I was thinking a
Brad
little
and
bit more of
Brandon,
the supply side of things, like right, the
that is a
flowing,
little cleaner,
yeah.
a little less gross, but it's
Right.
true. Like we talk about the gap in our lives, right? I mean,
Hmm.
we're fully alive. We want to help you identify the gap between where you are and where you know you could and should be, perhaps, and what's in the way. And usually it's us.
Yep.
Is what you just said. And when we actually turn this thing over from the cistern of us to the living water of Christ, things start to flow in ways. And it's opposite thinking, isn't it?
It is.
Like we feel like we have to make it happen because that's part of the American dream. You get the opportunity to make it happen. So now the burden's on me to make it happen. And as soon as I do that, I squelch my potential. There's a part of that unleashes potential because it gives us ownership and things like that. So I don't want to like completely poo-poo that. But if we're not allowing Jesus to be the architect of that, we really do squelch the potential in a major way. So Craig, this has been extremely valuable. While I still have you on here, just want to share two ways that inside the Fully Alive community, people can take the next step on these things. One is the Live Fully Alive course. Of course, it's free. Just go to the app and you'll see some introductory material on the navigation screen. And then the third or fourth element is the Live Fully Alive course. And it's 5 sessions long. There's videos there, and it really unpacks what we've been talking about today. We're created for intimacy and influence. We settle for approval and control that lead all the way up to sex and power. And you can see what's there and how that process grows, and how when we actually surrender to the Spirit's leadership in our life, we start to develop character and calling. And as our character goes up, so goes our intimacy with God and others. And as our calling goes up, so goes our influence for God and for others. So it's all right there in that Live Fully Alive thing. The Fully Alive book goes along with it to unpack all this stuff. And then one of the other things that Craig mentioned was so powerful for him in overcoming the enemy's attempts on his life was the accountability. And there's another explore level course in there called Who Do I Need on the Journey? How do I develop a 360 degree support system around my life? It's very simple. Of course, this one's free as well. Just go to the explore courses from the navigation menus and scroll down to about the 3rd or 4th course there. And it talks about how we need mentors in our life. We need peers in our life. We need apprentices in our life. And as we have those people that are ahead of us, beside us, and behind us in faith, we develop this 360 degree accountability circle in our life that protects us and guides us and keeps us moving forward with him. All right, last thoughts before we sign off, Craig. This has been fabulous.
No, I just appreciate the time. I appreciate the opportunity to tell some of the story that Jesus has authored in my life and continues to offer. And I just am so grateful for not only him, but the way that he has used you and disciples made in my life. And I'm just thankful, Brian.
Well, bro, it's 2 ways. It's reciprocal. You've been a huge blessing and an encouragement to me. The time today, and I'm going to let some people behind the curtain here, Craig. You didn't feel too hot about this doing this thing. You said these kind of things are not my jam. Don't feel very confident. You have been, God has, you have been unclogged today in sharing your story, because it's so real, and it's the picture of the fully alive life that we really are talking about. There's beauty even in those moments of suffering and obedience with Christ. Craig, thank you for being a dear friend, and thank you for serving well today on this podcast and encouraging others along the way. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.